Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are the calls that began as routine matters for local law enforcement, yet escalated beyond their jurisdiction, beyond their understanding, and into the hands of federal investigators. In rural America, where the distance between neighbors can be measured in miles rather than feet, and where the landscape itself can swallow sound and light, sheriff's departments serve as the first line of defense against the unknown. They respond to reports that would seem unbelievable in urban settings, where strange lights in the sky, unexplained sounds in the forest, or mysterious figures on deserted roads become matters of official record. Sometimes these initial calls reveal disturbances so profound, so far beyond ordinary explanation, that federal agencies must be called in: the FBI, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and other entities whose jurisdiction supersedes that of local law enforcement. What follows are 8 such cases, each beginning with a simple call to a rural sheriff's department, each ending with questions that remain unanswered to this day. The transcripts have been verified, the witnesses interviewed, and the official documentation examined. Yet the explanations remain elusive, leaving only the stark reality of what was reported, what was found, and what was left behind. In the vastness of the American countryside, where darkness falls differently and silence carries its own weight, these calls represent moments when the ordinary world brushed against something else entirely. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2014 when Sheriff's Deputy Michael Hayes received the initial call. Black Ridge, Tennessee, a small Appalachian community nestled in the Smoky Mountains, was preparing for winter. The call came in at 7:42 p.m. from a concerned mother, reporting that her 24-year-old son, Thomas Caldwell, had failed to return from a day hike in the Cherokee National Forest. Thomas was an experienced outdoorsman, a graduate student in environmental science who knew these mountains better than most. Deputy Hayes logged the call, assigned it case number 14B739, and prepared to begin what he assumed would be a standard search and rescue operation. The weather was clear, temperatures were mild for the season, and Thomas had left a detailed itinerary with his mother. Nothing about the initial report suggested this would become anything other than a routine missing person case. Thomas had set out that morning around 9 a.m., telling his mother he planned to hike the 8-mile loop trail that circled Black Ridge Mountain. He carried his usual equipment, a backpack with water, protein bars, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and his cell phone, which was fully charged. He was dressed appropriately for the weather in hiking boots, layered clothing, and a waterproof jacket. According to his mother, Sarah Caldwell, Thomas had made this exact hike dozens of times before, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. He knew the trail markers, the water crossings, and the terrain. The only unusual aspect of this particular hike, Sarah mentioned during her call, was that Thomas had seemed somewhat distracted when he left that morning, mentioning something about needing to check on something near the old fire tower on the ridge's western face. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Her son was a natural researcher, always investigating some aspect of the forest ecosystem. Deputy Hayes contacted the National Park Service rangers who managed that section of the forest, informing them of the situation. By 9 p.m., a small search party had been assembled, consisting of 3 local volunteers familiar with the area and Deputy Hayes himself. They began at the trailhead where Thomas had parked his 2008 Toyota Tacoma, finding the vehicle locked and undisturbed. Using the powerful flashlights they carried, the party began moving along the trail, calling Thomas's name at regular intervals. The forest was alive with the usual night sounds: crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The air was cool and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. As they progressed deeper into the woods, the beam of their flashlights created moving patterns of light and shadow across the trail, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. By midnight, they had covered approximately half the loop trail without finding any sign of Thomas or any indication that he had deviated from the path. The search resumed at dawn the following morning, now expanded to include 12 volunteers and 2 additional deputies from neighboring counties. The weather had changed overnight. A thick fog had settled in the valleys, making visibility difficult and muting sound. The search party divided into 4 teams, each assigned a section of the trail and surrounding area. It was Team 3, led by Deputy Hayes, that made the first unusual discovery around 10:30 a.m. Near the 3-mile marker, approximately 50 yards off the main trail, they found Thomas's backpack lying on the forest floor. It was unzipped, with some contents scattered nearby: his water bottle, half full, his first aid kit opened, and several protein bar wrappers. What was missing was his cell phone, his flashlight, and the jacket his mother had described. The search team noted the location with GPS coordinates and photographed the scene before collecting the items as evidence. The discovery was troubling. Experienced hikers rarely abandon essential equipment, and the scattered condition of the items suggested something other than a simple fall or disorientation. By 2 p.m., the search had intensified, with helicopters from the Tennessee Highway Patrol joining the effort. It was during one of these aerial surveys that the second, more perplexing discovery was made. Near the old fire tower that Thomas's mother had mentioned, observers spotted something unusual on the ground: a series of footprints that appeared to lead away from the tower and deeper into an area of the forest considered too rugged for casual hiking. What made these footprints noteworthy was their pattern. They were evenly spaced, suggesting a steady, unhurried pace, and they continued in a straight line for over 200 yards before disappearing at the edge of a steep ravine. Even more curious was that only one set of prints was visible, with no return tracks. When ground teams reached the location, they confirmed the aerial observation and made an additional discovery. Near where the footprints began, stuck in the bark of a pine tree approximately 6 feet above the ground, was Thomas's cell phone. The screen was cracked, and when technicians later examined it, they found it had been damaged beyond repair with no recoverable data. The SIM card was missing. As night fell on the second day of the search with still no sign of Thomas, Sheriff's Department officials made the decision to contact the FBI. The unusual nature of the evidence, the abandoned equipment, the single set of footprints leading to a ravine, the phone deliberately placed in a tree suggested this was no longer a standard missing person case. Special Agent Daniel Reynolds from the Knoxville field office arrived the following morning to take over the investigation. What the federal agents brought to the case was not just additional resources, but a different perspective. They were looking for signs of criminal activity that local law enforcement might have overlooked. Their first action was to secure the entire area as a potential crime scene, bringing in forensic specialists to examine the backpack and other items found near the trail. They also conducted a more thorough search of the fire tower, discovering something the local teams had missed: a series of strange symbols carved into the metal door at the base of the structure, apparently recently made based on the fresh wood shavings around the carvings. The investigation would continue for 3 weeks, expanding to include agents from the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch and even a consultant from the Department of the Interior with expertise in unexplained phenomena. What they uncovered deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Thomas's personal records revealed no known enemies, no history of mental health issues, and no reason why he might have wanted to disappear. His research at the university focused on forest ecology, with no connection to anything that might explain the symbols on the fire tower door. Search teams combed the ravine where the footprints ended, finding no body, no clothing, and no additional evidence. The most puzzling discovery came on the 8th day of the federal investigation, when a team searching the area around the fire tower found a hidden cache of items buried under a pile of rocks. Several disposable cell phones, all with their batteries removed, a collection of animal bones arranged in a circular pattern, and a leather-bound journal containing what appeared to be coded entries. written in a hand that matched Thomas's according to samples provided by his mother. The journal was sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis, where cryptographers worked for weeks to decode its contents. The decoded journal entries revealed a side of Thomas Caldwell that no one, not even his mother, had known about. Over the previous 6 months, he had apparently become obsessed with local legends about the Black Ridge area, specifically stories about mysterious disappearances dating back to the 1940s. He had documented 7 cases of people who had vanished in the same vicinity where he himself would later disappear, noting patterns of unexplained lights in the sky, strange sounds described as like tuning forks, and encounters with what witnesses described as shadow figures in the forest. The final entry, dated the night before his hike, read, "Tomorrow, I'll finally see for myself. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence. If I'm right, everything we think we know about this place is wrong. If I'm not back by dark, don't look for me on the trail." The journal also contained detailed drawings of the symbols found on the fire tower door, which Thomas had apparently identified as a form of communication used by whatever he believed was responsible for the disappearances. The case was officially closed by the FBI after 6 months of investigation, with Thomas Caldwell listed as a missing person, presumed dead. The official report suggested that he had likely fallen into the ravine where his footprints ended, though no body was ever recovered. Unofficially, several of the federal agents involved in the case privately admitted that they had no satisfactory explanation for what had happened. The symbols on the fire tower were never identified. The coded journal remained a subject of speculation within the Bureau, and the unusual cache of buried items was never traced to any known individual or group. The National Park Service quietly removed the fire tower the following year, citing safety concerns, and the trail was rerouted to avoid the area where Thomas's equipment had been found. Sarah Caldwell still lives in Black Ridge, maintaining a small memorial to her son near the trailhead, hoping that one day someone might provide answers that the extensive investigation failed to uncover. The federal case file remains active, though no new leads have emerged in the years since that October night, when a simple missing person call became something far more complex. Hundreds of miles away in the Pacific Northwest, another rural sheriff's department was about to encounter something that would test the boundaries of conventional investigation. It was early March of 2016, in the remote logging community of Bakers Creek, Oregon, when Sheriff's Deputy Lisa Wu responded to a call that would eventually involve multiple federal agencies. The initial report, logged at 2:17 a.m. on March 4th, came from a night watchman at the abandoned Bakers Creek sawmill, who reported unusual activity in the mill's main building. What began as a routine trespassing call would evolve into one of the most perplexing cases in the history of the county sheriff's department, eventually drawing the attention of the FBI, the Department of Energy, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The incident would be documented in Federal Case File 16892B, which remains partially classified to this day. The Bakers Creek sawmill had ceased operations 5 years earlier, when the decline in the timber industry made the facility no longer profitable. Since its closure, the property had been maintained by a single security guard, 68-year-old Robert Henderson, a former mill employee who lived in a small trailer on the premises. Henderson's responsibility was primarily to prevent copper theft and vandalism, tasks that usually involved little more than occasional patrols and reporting any suspicious activity to the sheriff's department. On the night in question, Henderson had just begun his first round of patrols when he noticed something unusual: a series of lights moving inside the main mill building, which should have been completely dark and unoccupied. From his position outside the chain-link fence surrounding the property, Henderson could see what appeared to be flashlights or lanterns being used inside, though the pattern of movement seemed too coordinated to be typical trespassers. When he approached the building to investigate, he reported hearing a low humming sound, unlike anything he had heard during his 40 years of working at the mill. Deputy Wu arrived at the scene approximately 20 minutes after Henderson's call. The night was clear and cold, with a light rain falling, typical for early March in that region of Oregon. As she exited her patrol vehicle, Wu immediately noticed the same lights that Henderson had described, visible through the grimy windows of the mill's main floor. What struck her as unusual was the quality of the light. It seemed to pulse in a rhythmic pattern, sometimes brightening to an intense blue-white color, then dimming to a soft amber glow. The humming sound that Henderson had mentioned was also audible from where Wu stood, though it seemed to fluctuate in intensity, sometimes fading to almost nothing, then returning as a low thrum that she could feel in her chest. Wu radioed for backup before approaching the building, noting in her subsequent report that she felt an unusual sense of unease, a feeling she attributed to the strange combination of light and sound. When 2 additional deputies arrived 15 minutes later, the 3 officers entered the mill building through a side door that had been forced open. The interior of the massive facility was dark, except for the mysterious lights, which they could now see were not flashlights or lanterns but rather floating orbs of light, approximately the size of basketballs, moving in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern through the large open space of the main floor. The humming sound was much louder inside the building, described by all 3 officers in their official statements as like a transformer or power station, but with a musical quality, almost like a choir humming a single sustained note. As the officers cautiously advanced deeper into the building, they noticed that the air seemed unusually thick and difficult to breathe, almost as if the atmospheric pressure had changed. Deputy Wu noted in her report that her radio began to experience significant interference, with static making communication difficult. The situation escalated when one of the floating orbs of light moved directly toward the officers, stopping approximately 20 feet away from them. According to the official report, the orb maintained its position for approximately 30 seconds, during which time the humming sound intensified dramatically. Deputy Wu described feeling a strange sensation, like pins and needles all over my skin, but without any visible cause. The orb then suddenly shot upward toward the high ceiling of the mill, disappearing into the darkness above the rafters. Almost simultaneously, the other orbs of light in the building converged in the center of the large open space, forming what appeared to be a rotating column of light that extended from the floor to the ceiling. The humming sound reached what the officers described as an almost painful intensity, causing all 3 to cover their ears. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light show ended. The column of light collapsed, the humming stopped, and the building was plunged into complete darkness and silence. The deputies spent the next 2 hours searching the building with their flashlights, finding no signs of any individuals or equipment that might have been responsible for what they had witnessed. The only physical evidence they discovered was a series of strange circular burn marks on the concrete floor where the column of light had formed, arranged in a perfect circle approximately 15 feet in diameter. The marks were still warm to the touch when discovered, though they cooled rapidly and left no permanent scarring on the concrete surface. When Sheriff's Department investigators returned the following morning with forensic equipment, they found no residue or chemical traces that might explain the phenomenon. The forced door through which the officers had entered showed no signs of tampering beyond what the deputies themselves had caused, and there were no footprints or other indicators that anyone else had been in the building. The case took an unexpected turn 3 days later when Robert Henderson, the security guard, reported additional activity at the mill. This time, however, the manifestation was different rather than floating lights. Henderson described seeing what appeared to be shadows moving against shadows inside the building, visible only when viewed through a specific window on the west side of the structure. When Deputy Wu returned to investigate, she confirmed the observation, though, like Henderson, she could only see the phenomenon from one specific vantage point. From that position, the interior of the building appeared to contain multiple human-like figures, though they were completely black, as if made of solid darkness, and moved in ways that seemed to defy normal physics, sometimes passing through solid objects, sometimes moving with impossible speed, sometimes appearing and disappearing without any apparent cause. Wu called for backup again, but by the time additional officers arrived, the phenomenon had ceased. It was at this point that Sheriff's Department officials decided to contact federal authorities. The first to arrive were agents from the FBI, who initially treated the case as a possible trespassing or vandalism incident. Their skepticism quickly faded when they reviewed the body camera footage from the deputy's initial entry into the building, which clearly showed the floating orbs of light and captured the humming sound. The FBI agents also interviewed all witnesses extensively, finding no inconsistencies in their accounts and no indication of hallucination or deception. After consulting with their superiors, the FBI contacted the Department of Energy, suspecting that some kind of experimental technology might be involved. Within 48 hours, a team of scientists from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory arrived at Baker's Creek, bringing with them an array of sophisticated monitoring equipment. What the scientific team discovered over the next 2 weeks deepened the mystery rather than solving it. They documented repeated occurrences of both the light phenomena and the shadow figures, though these manifestations were unpredictable and lasted for varying durations, from a few minutes to several hours. The equipment recorded unusual electromagnetic fluctuations during these events, with frequencies that the scientists could not identify. They also detected localized changes in atmospheric pressure and temperature, sometimes varying by as much as 20 degrees within a few feet of each other. Most puzzling of all, they recorded a series of radio signals that appeared to be emanating from within the mill, signals that followed no known communication protocol and contained what appeared to be structured information, though in a format that no one could decode. These signals continued even when no visual phenomena were occurring, suggesting that whatever was causing the manifestations was present at the site on a continuous basis. The investigation expanded further when the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, learned of the case. A team of their specialists arrived in Baker's Creek with even more sophisticated equipment, including devices designed to detect subatomic particles and gravitational anomalies. What they found was, according to the partially declassified summary of their report, beyond current scientific understanding. They documented temporary but measurable distortions in the local gravitational field during the most intense manifestations, as well as the presence of previously unknown subatomic particles that appeared and disappeared within microseconds. The DARPA team also noted that the phenomena seemed to respond to observation. The more sophisticated the monitoring equipment became, the less frequently the manifestations occurred, as if whatever was causing them was aware of being watched and could adjust its behavior accordingly. The federal investigation continued for 3 months, during which time the Baker's Creek sawmill became one of the most heavily monitored locations in the United States. Scientists documented dozens of manifestations, each slightly different from the others, yet all sharing certain characteristics: the unusual electromagnetic signatures, the atmospheric changes, and the apparent intelligence behind the phenomena. The decision was eventually made to seal the entire property, with the area declared a restricted zone under the authority of the Department of Energy. Robert Henderson was relocated to a new home in a neighboring county, provided with a substantial settlement in exchange for his silence about what he had witnessed. The 3 sheriff's deputies who first responded to the call were debriefed extensively and required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The official story released to the public was that the mill had been contaminated by hazardous materials and was being cleaned up by the Environmental Protection Agency, an explanation that most local residents found questionable but accepted without question. Today, the Baker's Creek sawmill remains behind a tall fence topped with barbed wire, with warning signs indicating a hazardous materials site. The federal case file remains partially classified, with only redacted versions available to researchers. What is known is that the monitoring equipment continues to record anomalies at the site, though the frequency of visible manifestations has decreased significantly since the initial investigation. The scientists who studied the phenomenon have published nothing about their findings, maintaining their silence under the terms of their government contracts. Deputy Lisa Wu eventually left the sheriff's department, taking a position with a private security firm in another state. She has never spoken publicly about what she witnessed that night in March of 2016, though in a private conversation with a former colleague, she reportedly said, "I don't know what it was, but I know it was real, and I know it was intelligent. Whatever is in that mill, it's not human, and it's still there." The case remains officially unresolved, a testament to the limitations of human understanding when confronted with phenomena that exist beyond the boundaries of current scientific knowledge. In the high desert of southwestern Colorado, the vast expanse of the Mesa Verde region holds secrets that predate modern civilization by centuries. It was here, in the spring of 2017, that a routine call to the Montezuma County Sheriff's Department would evolve into a federal investigation involving the National Park Service, the FBI, and even a special unit from the Department of the Interior. The incident began on April 12th at approximately 9:30 p.m. when a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park made an emergency call reporting unusual activity near the Cliff Palace dwellings. What the ranger described that night would challenge conventional understanding of the ancient ruins and eventually lead to the temporary closure of one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America. The federal case, designated 17442 MVP, would remain open for years, with more questions than answers in its final report. Ranger Daniel Mitchell had worked at Mesa Verde for 7 years and knew the park's terrain and history as well as anyone. On the night in question, he was conducting a final patrol before closing the park for the evening when he noticed something unusual near the Cliff Palace area, a series of lights that appeared to be moving within the ancient dwellings, which should have been completely dark and unoccupied. Mitchell approached cautiously, using his flashlight to illuminate the path as he made his way toward the cliff face. As he drew closer, he could see that the lights were not flashlights or lanterns, but rather small, glowing orbs that seemed to float through the rooms of the ancient settlement, moving with what appeared to be purpose and direction. Mitchell radioed dispatch to report what he was seeing, his voice steady despite the unusual nature of the site. "I'm observing multiple light sources inside Cliff Palace," he reported. "They appear to be self-illuminated and are moving independently of any visible source or operator." Sheriff's Deputy Rebecca Chen responded to the call, arriving at the park entrance approximately 20 minutes later. The night was clear and cool, with a crescent moon providing limited illumination over the desert landscape. As Chen followed Mitchell's directions to the Cliff Palace overlook, she could see the phenomenon for herself. Small, softball-sized orbs of pale blue light moving through the ancient rooms and passageways of the cliff dwellings. What struck her as particularly unusual was the pattern of their movement rather than floating randomly. The lights seemed to follow specific paths, sometimes entering one room through a narrow opening, then emerging from another room some distance away, as if navigating the complex structure with knowledge of its layout. Chen radioed for backup before approaching the dwellings, noting in her report that she felt a sense of what she described as reverential unease, as if witnessing something sacred and deeply mysterious. When 2 additional deputies arrived, the 4 law enforcement officers made their way down the trail to the Cliff Palace dwellings. As they approached, the floating lights seemed to retreat deeper into the structure, eventually disappearing from view. The officers entered the main plaza area, using their flashlights to examine the ancient rooms and passageways. Everything appeared normal, with no signs of recent human activity beyond their own presence. It was Deputy Chen who first noticed the temperature difference. The air inside the dwellings was noticeably warmer than the night air outside, despite the stone construction that should have maintained a consistent temperature. As they moved deeper into the complex, they also began to hear a faint sound, like a low humming or chanting, though they couldn't determine its source or direction. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the stone walls and floors. The investigation took an unexpected turn when one of the deputies noticed something unusual in one of the kiva's circular subterranean rooms used by the ancestral Puebloans for ceremonial purposes. The kiva in question had been excavated and stabilized by archaeologists decades earlier and was normally off-limits to visitors. On this night, however, the protective covering had been removed, and inside the kiva, the deputies found a series of symbols drawn in what appeared to be sand, arranged in a complex, circular pattern. The symbols were unlike any known ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs or pictographs, featuring geometric shapes and lines that formed what appeared to be a schematic of some kind. Most unusual of all, the sand in which the symbols were drawn was warm to the touch, despite the cool night air. As the officers examined the kiva, they noticed that the humming sound seemed to be stronger there, almost as if emanating from the symbols themselves. Ranger Mitchell, recognizing that this was beyond the scope of a routine patrol, contacted the park's chief ranger, who in turn notified the National Park Service's Investigative Services branch. By morning, a team of NPS investigators had arrived, along with archaeologists from the nearby Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. What they discovered in the kiva fascinated and puzzled them. The symbols appeared to be a combination of authentic ancestral Puebloan designs and what could only be described as technical diagrams, resembling circuitry or architectural schematics. The archaeologists noted that some of the symbols incorporated elements that were only visible under ultraviolet light, suggesting they had been created with materials that contained phosphorescent properties. The sand in which the symbols were drawn was collected for analysis, as were samples from the walls of the kiva, which showed faint traces of the same phosphorescent material. The case escalated further when similar symbols were discovered in 2 other kivas within the Cliff Palace complex, as well as in the nearby Spruce Tree House dwellings. All of these locations showed the same unusual temperature variations and the same faint humming sound. The National Park Service decided to close the entire Cliff Palace area to visitors while they conducted a thorough investigation. It was at this point that the FBI was brought in, not because of any criminal activity, but because of the Bureau's expertise in investigating unusual phenomena that might have national security implications. Special Agent Thomas Bradford from the Denver Field Office arrived with a team of forensic specialists, bringing equipment designed to detect radiation, electromagnetic fields, and other potential hazards. What the federal investigators found deepened the mystery rather than solving it. The phosphorescent material used to create the symbols was analyzed and found to contain elements that shouldn't have been accessible to the ancient ancestral Puebloan people specifically. Rare earth elements that are only found in specific geological formations hundreds of miles from Mesa Verde. The symbols themselves, when examined under various types of radiation, revealed layers of information not visible to the naked eye, including what appeared to be mathematical equations and astronomical data. Most puzzling of all, when the investigators created digital models of the symbols and ran them through advanced pattern recognition software, they found that the designs contained what appeared to be 3-dimensional representations of structures that didn't match any known ancestral Puebloan architecture, featuring geometric forms and engineering principles that seemed beyond the technological capabilities of the period. The investigation took an even stranger turn when one of the archaeologists, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, noticed that certain symbols appeared to correspond to specific astronomical alignments that only occurred during particular times of the year. Using computer models, she determined that the symbols in the kivas were positioned to align with celestial bodies in ways that suggested sophisticated astronomical knowledge, including awareness of stars and planets that would not have been visible to the naked eye. Even more curious, some of the alignments corresponded to dates in the future rather than the past, including one significant alignment that was scheduled to occur just 3 weeks after the discovery of the symbols. The National Park Service, in consultation with the FBI and other federal agencies, made the decision to keep the Cliff Palace area closed and to monitor the site continuously until after this astronomical event. What happened on the night of the celestial alignment, May 3, 2017, would become the most perplexing aspect of the entire case. A team of federal agents, archaeologists, and scientific specialists had assembled at Mesa Verde to document whatever might occur. As the predicted alignment began shortly after midnight, the floating orbs of light reappeared in the Cliff Palace dwellings, more numerous and brighter than before. At the same time, the symbols in the kivas began to glow with a soft blue light, and the humming sound intensified dramatically. What happened next was documented by multiple recording devices, but remains difficult to describe in conventional terms. According to the official report, a series of light-based manifestations occurred, appearing to demonstrate principles of physics and engineering beyond current human understanding. The manifestations included what appeared to be three-dimensional projections of structures, some resembling the kivas themselves but with additional geometric components, and others representing what looked like complex machinery or technology. The most controversial aspect of the incident was what appeared to be communication attempts. The floating lights arranged themselves in patterns that corresponded to the symbols in the kivas, sometimes forming what looked like mathematical equations or geometric proofs. At one point, a series of light pulses was detected by the monitoring equipment, pulses that followed a pattern too regular to be random but too complex to be easily decoded. The federal agents in charge of the investigation later consulted with linguists, mathematicians, and even cryptographers from the National Security Agency, but no one was able to definitively interpret the meaning of these patterns. The entire event lasted for approximately 3 hours, ending as suddenly as it began when the celestial alignment passed. In the aftermath of the incident, the federal investigation intensified. The Cliff Palace area remained closed to the public for over a year, while specialists from multiple agencies studied the site. The symbols in the kivas were carefully preserved, with casts made and the original designs protected by transparent coverings. The National Park Service eventually reopened portions of the area, but the kivas where the symbols were found remained permanently closed to visitors. The official explanation given to the public was that unusual geological activity had been detected, requiring further study for safety reasons. This explanation satisfied most people, though local residents and regular visitors to the park noticed that something had changed. The rangers seemed more vigilant. New security cameras had been installed, and certain areas of the park were now permanently restricted. The federal case file on the Mesa Verde incident 17442 MVP remains partially classified. What is known from the declassified portions is that the investigation continued for over 2 years, with periodic monitoring of the site documenting occasional reoccurrences of the phenomena, though never with the intensity of the May 3rd event. The scientific teams who studied the symbols and the light phenomena published nothing about their findings, maintaining their silence under the terms of their government contracts. Ranger Daniel Mitchell was eventually transferred to another park, reportedly at his own request, though he has never spoken publicly about what he witnessed. Deputy Rebecca Chen left the Sheriff's Department a year after the incident, taking a position with the National Park Service as a law enforcement ranger at a different location. In a private conversation with a former colleague, she reportedly said, "I don't know what we saw that night, but I know it changed how I think about history and human achievement. Whatever happened at Mesa Verde, it suggests that someone or something was there long before us and might still be there now, watching from beyond the boundaries of our understanding." The rolling hills of rural Kentucky are often associated with quiet farmland, winding roads, and communities where everyone knows one another. Harper Valley was one such place, a small, close-knit community where nights were dark, phones rang rarely after midnight, and the most serious calls local deputies usually handled involved livestock wandering onto roads. That sense of normalcy shattered in the summer of 2018, when a sequence of disappearances began under circumstances so disturbing that they would ultimately draw in state and federal authorities. What started as a single missing person report would become a case that remains unresolved years later, cataloged under Federal File 18731-HV. The first incident occurred on June 15, 2018, at approximately 11:47 p.m. Jennifer Harlow, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher, called the Breckinridge County Sheriff's Department in a state of panic. She told dispatch that her husband, Mark Harlow, had vanished from their bedroom while she slept beside him. Deputy Brian Miller arrived shortly after midnight to find Jennifer shaken but coherent. She explained that she and Mark had gone to bed around 10:30 p.m. after a quiet evening at home. At some point later, she woke up feeling unusually cold despite the warm summer air. Reaching for the blankets, she realized Mark was gone. Assuming he had stepped into the kitchen or bathroom, Jennifer searched the house. What she found instead alarmed her. The front door stood open, the screen door torn from its hinges. Outside, the night was silent. Mark was nowhere to be found. His wallet, phone, and keys were still on the nightstand, and his truck remained parked in the driveway. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no indication that he had planned to leave. Deputy Miller searched the property thoroughly. Aside from the damaged screen door, there was little to document, except for something strange in the front yard. In the dew-covered grass were several perfectly circular impressions, each about 6 inches across, arranged in a deliberate pattern. There were no footprints leading to or from them. Miller photographed the marks, noted them in his report, and proceeded with standard missing person procedures. When 48 hours passed with no trace of Mark Harlow, the case was escalated to the Kentucky State Police. Exactly 1 week later, on June 22nd, the second disappearance occurred just 3 miles away. 16-year-old Tommy Roberts vanished from his bedroom during the night. His mother had checked on him around 10 p.m. and found him asleep. By morning, his room was empty. The window was open, the screen removed and lying on the ground below. There were no footprints beneath the window, no disturbed soil, only the same strange circular marks in the grass. Like Mark Harlow, Tommy had left behind his phone, wallet, and car keys. Deputy Miller responded again and immediately recognized the pattern. The similarities were too precise to ignore. He notified his superiors, and local authorities began to suspect something far beyond a coincidence. The possibility of a serial offender was discussed, but no known method or motive fit the evidence. The third disappearance on June 29th marked a turning point. Martha Endicott, a 72-year-old widow living alone, vanished overnight from her cottage on the edge of Harper Valley. She had spoken with her daughter at 9:30 p.m. and sounded perfectly normal. The next morning, her daughter arrived for their usual breakfast and found the house empty. Martha's purse sat on the kitchen table, her car locked in the carport. The back door was open. Outside in the grass were the same circular impressions investigators had now seen twice before. At that point, the FBI formally took jurisdiction. The cases were combined into a single investigation designated 18731HV, with Special Agent Maria Rodriguez assigned as lead. Federal resources poured into Harper Valley. Forensic teams examined the homes. Behavioral analysts profiled the victims. Geologists were brought in to analyze the mysterious ground markings. Their findings only deepened the mystery. The circular impressions were not consistent with animal tracks, machinery, or human activity. Soil samples revealed unusual elemental concentrations not native to the area. The grass within the circles showed signs of accelerated decay, as though it had aged weeks within hours. All 3 sites shared geographic similarities: elevated ground, isolation from neighbors, and unobstructed views of the night sky. Despite increased patrols and public warnings, the 4th disappearance occurred on July 6th. Sarah Jenkins, a 28-year-old nurse, had returned home from her night shift and gone to sleep around 8 a.m. When her husband checked on her at noon, she was gone. The bedroom window was open. The screen lay below. The circular marks were once again present. This time, investigators found something new. Near the window was a small metallic fragment, roughly the size of a dime. Initial analysis suggested titanium, but closer examination revealed microscopic etchings that did not resemble any known language, code, or manufacturing process. The object was sent to an FBI laboratory for advanced testing. The 5th and final disappearance occurred on July 20th. David Chen, a 45-year-old software engineer who had recently moved to Harper Valley, vanished from his bedroom overnight. Unlike previous victims, David had installed extensive security measures: cameras, alarms, motion lights. None were triggered. Footage reviewed by FBI technicians showed nothing unusual, except for a single corrupted frame at 2:17 a.m. In that fraction of a second, the image appeared to show a vertical column of light descending toward the bedroom window. The next frame returned to normal. After David Chen's disappearance, the FBI made an unprecedented decision. Several families living in homes matching the disappearance profile were quietly evacuated. No public explanation was given, fueling panic and national media coverage. At a press conference, Special Agent Rodriguez acknowledged unusual circumstances, but declined to elaborate. Behind closed doors, the investigation widened dramatically. Experts from diverse fields were consulted, including astrophysics, aerospace engineering, and specialists familiar with historical abduction reports. The metallic fragment recovered near Sarah Jenkins's home showed isotopic ratios inconsistent with terrestrial materials. Analysts could not determine how or where it had been manufactured. As the investigation continued, additional witnesses came forward. Some reported seeing strange lights in the sky on the nights of the disappearances. Others described low humming sounds or electrical malfunctions. A truck driver passing through Harper Valley reported seeing what he described as a silent aircraft hovering over the area around 2 a.m. on July 20th. A farmer admitted his security cameras had failed repeatedly on key nights. An amateur astronomer shared photographs of unexplained light anomalies, though none were clear enough for definitive conclusions. Despite months of investigation, no bodies were found. No communication was ever received from the missing individuals. The circular ground marks remained the most compelling physical evidence, described by FBI consultants as showing signs of instantaneous compression, force applied and removed in less than a second. By late 2019, the active investigation slowed. Families returned to their homes, though many chose to move away. The FBI maintained a limited presence for nearly 2 years. Reports of strange lights diminished, but never fully stopped. The 5 missing people, Mark Harlow, Tommy Roberts, Martha Endicott, Sarah Jenkins, and David Chen, were never located. In a private briefing, Special Agent Rodriguez reportedly stated that all conventional explanations had been exhausted. Whatever happened in Harper Valley, she concluded, operated beyond known human capability. The case remains open, and in Harper Valley, after dark, some residents still keep their curtains closed, watching the hills beyond their windows, wondering what else might be watching back. The remote coastal community of Blackwater Sound, Florida, lies at the edge of the Everglades where salt marsh gives way to tangled mangrove forests. The region is quiet, sparsely populated, and defined by water in constant transition. Brackish channels, shallow bays, and slow-moving tidal flats that stretch toward the Gulf of Mexico. For generations, fishermen have worked these waters, learning their rhythms and moods. Strange things are sometimes reported in isolated coastal regions, but few incidents have ever unsettled local authorities the way Blackwater Sound did in the fall of 2019. In the early morning hours of October 28, 2019, at approximately 3:42 a.m., the Monroe County Sheriff's Department received an emergency call that initially sounded like a possible boating accident. The caller, however, was not reporting distress or damage. He was reporting something he could not explain. That call would eventually trigger a multi-agency federal investigation involving the U.S. Coast Guard, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, culminating in what became Federal Case File 19842-BWS. The call came from Hector Morales, a 47-year-old commercial shrimp fisherman who had worked the waters of Blackwater Sound for more than 2 decades. Morales was experienced, well known to local authorities, and not prone to exaggeration. He told dispatch that while checking his nets shortly after 3 a.m., he noticed unusual lights beneath the surface of the water, roughly 200 yards from his boat. At first, he assumed it might be another vessel using underwater equipment or perhaps bioluminescent marine life disturbed by currents. But the lights did not behave like anything he had seen before. Using his spotlight, Morales observed that the lights were arranged in a precise geometric pattern. They moved slowly, deliberately, forming what appeared to be a perfect circle nearly 50 feet across. The water inside that circle began to churn and bubble, while the surrounding surface remained calm. According to Morales, the contrast was striking. like watching a storm contained within invisible walls. Moments later, the situation became even stranger. The circular patch of water began to rise. Not spray, not mist, but a solid mass of water lifting itself upward, maintaining its shape. Within seconds, a dome formed, clear, intact, and illuminated from within by the same moving lights. The structure hovered above the surface as if held together by a force Morales could not see or understand. Deputy Carlos Rodriguez was on overnight patrol and responded to the call. Blackwater Sound was near the edge of his assigned area, requiring nearly 40 minutes of travel to reach the nearest boat launch at Flamingo. Throughout the drive, Rodriguez remained in radio contact with Morales, who continued to describe the phenomenon in real time. By then, the water dome had risen nearly 20 feet above the surface and had begun rotating slowly. Morales also reported a low humming sound, one he could feel vibrating in his chest rather than hear clearly through the air. By the time Rodriguez launched his patrol boat and reached Morales's position at approximately 4:28 a.m., the phenomenon had intensified. The dome now stood nearly 30 feet high and had begun to change shape. The smooth, circular form distorted into interlocking geometric patterns, triangles, squares, and pentagons, somehow maintaining structural integrity while composed entirely of water. Inside, the lights multiplied, forming a shifting three-dimensional lattice. Rodriguez later wrote in his official report that the water itself appeared altered, thicker than normal, reflecting light in unnatural ways. Rodriguez maintained a safe distance and activated both his body camera and vessel-mounted recording equipment. The humming sound grew louder, cutting through engine noise. As dawn approached, the structure became even more visible against the pale morning sky. Then, slowly at first, it began to move. The water formation traveled southward toward the open gulf, accelerating gradually. Morales and Rodriguez followed at a cautious distance, maintaining visual contact while requesting additional support. Despite its movement, the structure left no lasting wake. The water behind it settled almost immediately, showing no trace of disturbance. Approximately 5 miles from the initial sighting, the phenomenon abruptly ended. The entire structure collapsed at once, slamming back into the sea with tremendous force. Waves spread outward in all directions, soaking both boats. When the spray settled, nothing remained. No debris, no residue, no visible damage to the water's surface beyond ordinary wave action. By that time, the U.S. Coast Guard had dispatched a helicopter from Miami. Arriving on scene around 6:15 a.m., the crew observed no active anomaly but did identify unusual circular patterns on the water's surface, aligned in a southward path. Each was roughly 50 feet across and slowly dissipating. The helicopter also detected fluctuating electromagnetic readings that could not be easily explained. With growing concern about environmental impact, the Environmental Protection Agency was notified. Their emergency response division arrived later that morning and began collecting water samples. The results were puzzling. The water contained elevated mineral concentrations, not typical of South Florida's marine environment. More striking was the discovery of microscopic organisms unlike known species, exhibiting characteristics of both algae and bacteria. Molecular analysis showed temporary alterations in water structure, with atomic bonding patterns briefly deviating from standard HO arrangements before reverting to normal. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration joined the investigation after sonar surveys revealed something unexpected on the seafloor. Beneath the area where the structure had been observed were several perfectly circular depressions, matching the size and alignment of the surface patterns. These formations were absent from previous surveys. Sediment cores taken from the depressions showed signs of extreme, instantaneous compression, as though a massive force had been applied and removed almost immediately. Trace elements found in the sediment matched those detected in the altered water samples, including isotopes not normally present in the region. At this stage, the FBI assumed control of the investigative coordination. Special Agent Linda Park led a forensic team tasked with evaluating witness credibility and evidence integrity. Interviews with Morales and Rodriguez produced consistent, highly detailed accounts. Neither man showed signs of stress-induced hallucination or fabrication. Enhanced analysis of Rodriguez's video footage revealed clear imagery of the water structure and internal lighting. Audio recordings captured the humming sound, which acoustic specialists later identified as containing multiple overlapping frequencies, not matching known natural or mechanical sources. Over the following weeks, federal agencies continued monitoring Blackwater Sound. The Coast Guard established a temporary patrol zone. The EPA and NOAA tracked environmental recovery, noting that water chemistry and marine life gradually returned to baseline conditions. Additional witnesses came forward. Fishermen and researchers who had previously noticed strange lights or electromagnetic interference in the area, though none had reported an event of comparable scale. One significant finding emerged from analysis of tide and weather data. The incident occurred during a period of exceptionally low tidal movement and ideal atmospheric clarity. There were no storms, strong currents, or environmental factors that could account for optical distortion. Investigators concluded that the conditions were nearly perfect for observation, ruling out many conventional explanations. The final federal report, largely classified, offered a public explanation involving rare bioluminescent activity combined with unusual water density effects. Privately, investigators acknowledged that the explanation failed to account for the structure's behavior, movement, or recorded physical evidence. Federal Case File 19842 BWS remains open. No similar events have been reported since. Hector Morales continues to fish Blackwater Sound, now with advanced recording equipment on board. Carlos Rodriguez was later promoted and reassigned, though he occasionally returns to the area. Among locals, the story of the Water Dome has become legend, a reminder that even familiar waters may hold secrets beyond human understanding. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota is a land shaped by deep time. Rolling plains, fractured badlands, and ancient stone formations stretch across miles of wind-swept terrain, carrying both the weight of history and the quiet endurance of the present. For generations, the land has been understood not merely as ground beneath one's feet, but as something alive, aware, and responsive. In the winter of 2020, that belief collided unexpectedly with modern science when a series of unusual calls to the Oglala Lakota County Sheriff's Department triggered one of the most carefully documented yet unresolved investigations in recent federal history. The incident began on January 17, 2020, at approximately 10:23 p.m., when a resident of the remote community of Manderson called emergency dispatch to report what she described as the ground singing. At first glance, the report sounded like a possible earthquake or a structural issue caused by freezing temperatures. But the caller was calm, precise, and deeply unsettled. What she was experiencing, she insisted, was neither shaking nor cracking. It was vibration with rhythm and intent. The caller was Eleanor Red Cloud, a 63-year-old elder and traditional knowledge keeper who had lived in the same house on the outskirts of Manderson her entire life. She told dispatch that she had been sitting quietly in her living room shortly after 10 p.m. when she began to feel a low vibration coming up through the floor. It wasn't sudden or violent. Instead, it was steady, persistent, and strangely ordered. As minutes passed, she noticed that the vibration caused objects in her home to resonate. Chairs, cabinets, and even the window glass seemed to hum in response. The sensation was not heard through the air, but felt through the body, settling deep into her chest and bones. Most unsettling of all, Red Cloud said the vibration carried patterns, rising and falling in a way that felt deliberate, almost like music or speech spoken by the earth itself. Deputy Joseph Walking Eagle was dispatched to investigate. With 15 years of experience, he initially suspected minor seismic activity or structural stress caused by extreme cold. Temperatures that night were well below freezing, and the region was no stranger to unusual sounds caused by shifting ground. When he arrived at Red Cloud's home around 10:45 p.m., his skepticism faded almost immediately. The moment he stepped inside, he felt it, a steady, low-frequency thrumming beneath his boots. The vibration was subtle, but unmistakable. Objects on shelves trembled in synchrony, and the air felt heavy, as if pressure were building from below. Walking Eagle stepped outside to compare sensations and noticed something odd. The vibration weakened significantly outdoors. It was still present, but muted. Inside the house, however, it was amplified, as if the structure itself were acting as a resonator. Recognizing that this was not a routine call, he radioed dispatch and documented his observations, noting that the phenomenon did not match anything he had encountered before. Within the hour, additional calls began coming in from nearby residents. By midnight, deputies had confirmed that at least 12 homes within a 3-block radius were experiencing similar vibrations. The reports varied in intensity. Some residents described a strong, almost overwhelming sensation, while others noticed only faint humming. Several homes were unaffected entirely. Investigators quickly noticed a pattern. Houses with stone or concrete foundations experienced the strongest effects, while wood-framed structures were less affected. This suggested the phenomenon was interacting directly with solid materials, rather than air or surface movement. The Oglala Lakota County Sheriff's Department contacted the South Dakota Geological Survey, suspecting a localized seismic event. However, data from the nearest seismograph, located 60 miles away, showed no earthquakes, tremors, or subsurface shifts. Whatever was happening was not registering as conventional seismic activity. The following morning, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was notified due to the incident occurring on reservation land. A team from the BIA's Division of Environmental Services arrived later that day with instruments designed to measure ground movement, electromagnetic fields, and acoustic frequencies. Their findings only deepened the mystery. There were no detectable seismic waves, no abnormal electromagnetic readings, and no airborne sound waves. The vibration, they concluded, was being transmitted directly through the ground and into building foundations, manifesting as resonance within solid objects. Even more puzzling, the frequency was not constant. It shifted in complex patterns, forming sequences that appeared structured rather than random. As concerns grew, the FBI joined the investigation. Special Agent Rachel Thompson arrived from the Rapid City Field Office with technical specialists equipped to analyze subsonic frequencies and gravitational irregularities. Their equipment revealed that the vibration existed below the threshold of human hearing, explaining why it was felt rather than heard. Yet within that low-frequency range were layered harmonics, precise, repeating, and occasionally evolving. Some patterns repeated after several hours, while others changed gradually over time. The specialists noted that the complexity of the signal suggested intent or design, not a natural byproduct of geology. At this point, Eleanor Red Cloud offered an insight that shifted the direction of the investigation. Drawing from Lakota cosmology, she spoke of what her people called the songs of the earth, the belief that certain places could act as channels through which the land expressed memory and awareness. She guided investigators to a site roughly 2 miles from Manderson, an area long considered spiritually significant. There, the ground revealed an unusual formation, quartz veins running through limestone in branching, angular patterns that resembled antenna arrays or circuitry. When monitoring equipment was placed near these formations, readings spiked. The vibration was strongest there. Scientists theorized that the quartz, known for its resonant properties, might be amplifying or organizing the frequency. This discovery drew the attention of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA specialists arrived with advanced instruments designed to detect phenomena beyond conventional physics. Their findings, summarized in partially declassified documents, described localized distortions in gravitational fields rather than mechanical energy transfer. In simple terms, solid objects were vibrating without force being applied in any known way. The frequency contained mathematical sequences and geometric ratios, some of which aligned with known astronomical patterns. Even more extraordinary, when DARPA introduced specific signals into the ground, the frequency responded, changing, adapting, and sometimes mirroring the input. The implication was unsettling. The phenomenon appeared capable of interaction. Over the next 6 weeks, the Pine Ridge resonance evolved. The signal grew more layered and intricate, with what researchers described as harmonic strata operating simultaneously. Some appeared mathematical, others spatial, and a few bore resemblance to musical structures. Linguists and mathematicians attempted analysis, identifying references to celestial alignments not yet visible from Earth. The presence of people, particularly tribal elders, seemed to influence the phenomenon. When ceremonies were held nearby, the frequency became richer and more complex. When the area was empty, it simplified. Jurisdictional authority remained with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which enforced strict research protocols and ensured tribal leaders were consulted throughout the process. Elders emphasized that the site had always been sacred, a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. They believed the resonance was not new, but remembered. By late March 2020, the phenomenon began to fade. The frequency simplified, lost layers, and eventually ceased altogether. The official explanation cited a rare geological interaction involving quartz formations and natural fields. For those who experienced it, the explanation felt incomplete. Today, the site near Manderson is protected and access is restricted. The case file, 20-113 PRR, remains partially classified. Deputy Joseph Walking Eagle later left law enforcement to work in cultural preservation. Eleanor Red Cloud maintained that what occurred was not an anomaly, but a moment of listening. The case remains unresolved, standing at the intersection of science, tradition, and the enduring mystery of a living land briefly allowed to speak. The vast wilderness of the Adirondack Park in upstate New York contains some of the most remote and inaccessible terrain in the eastern United States. It was here, in the spring of 2021, that a routine call to the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department would evolve into a federal investigation involving the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the U.S. Forest Service, and the FBI. The incident began on April 9th at approximately 6:15 p.m., when a group of hikers made an emergency call reporting what they described as impossible echoes in the mountains near the town of Indian Lake. What began as a possible rescue situation or navigational emergency would become one of the most acoustically puzzling cases in the history of federal wilderness investigations, eventually designated as Federal Case File 21357 ADK. The initial call came from Marcus Thorne, a 32-year-old outdoor enthusiast who was leading a group of 4 hikers on a multi-day trek through the High Peaks Wilderness. According to his call to the Sheriff's Department, the group had set up camp for the night near the base of Mount Marshall when they began to hear something unusual. At first, they thought it might be other hikers or perhaps the sound of distant waterfalls. But as they listened more carefully, they realized that what they were hearing was echoes of their own voices and movements, returning to them with impossible clarity and from impossible directions. When Thorne called out, "Hello," the sound returned to them not once, but multiple times, each repetition perfectly clear and from a different direction, as if the mountains were actively reflecting and redirecting the sound in ways that defied the normal laws of acoustics. What was particularly unsettling, Thorne reported, was that some of the echoes seemed to contain words or phrases that none of the hikers had spoken, as if the sounds were being modified or added to by whatever was creating them. Sheriff's Deputy Sarah Mitchell responded to the call, though the remote location would require her to drive to the nearest trailhead and then hike approximately 6 miles to reach the hikers' campsite. As she prepared for the journey, she contacted the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's forest rangers, who had more experience with wilderness operations and better knowledge of the specific area where the hikers were located. Ranger David Chen, who had worked in the Adirondacks for over a decade, agreed to meet Mitchell at the trailhead and accompany her to the hikers' campsite. What neither of them knew as they set out that evening was that they were about to experience something that would challenge their understanding of acoustics, geology, and perhaps even the nature of reality itself. When Mitchell and Chen arrived at the hikers' campsite around 9:30 p.m., they immediately experienced what the hikers had described. The moment they entered the small clearing where the tents were set up, they noticed that the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the call of a distant owl, the flow of a nearby stream were being echoed back with unusual clarity and from multiple directions. When Chen called out to announce their presence, his voice returned to them at least 5 times, each repetition perfectly clear and from a different direction, as if the surrounding mountains were somehow acting as a sophisticated acoustic system. What struck Mitchell as particularly unusual was that some of the echoes seemed to be delayed in ways that didn't correspond to normal sound reflection. Some returned almost instantly, while others were delayed by several seconds, far longer than would be expected even from the most distant mountain peaks. The situation escalated when the hikers played a recording they had made on their phone, a short clip of them talking around the campfire earlier that evening. As the recording played, the sounds were echoed back from the surrounding mountains, but with disturbing additions, words and phrases that none of the hikers had spoken, sometimes in what sounded like different languages, sometimes in what might have been animal vocalizations, and sometimes in frequencies that were barely audible to human ears. Chen, who had some knowledge of acoustics from his training with the DEC, noted that this was impossible under normal circumstances. Echoes should be perfect reflections of the original sound, not modified or enhanced with additional elements. Mitchell, following procedure, radioed dispatch to report her observations, though she struggled to find the right words to describe what she was hearing. The federal response to the incident began the following morning when the U.S. Forest Service was notified, given that the phenomenon was occurring in the High Peaks Wilderness area, which was managed by the federal government. A team of specialists from the Forest Service's Rocky Mountain Research Station arrived in Indian Lake by afternoon, bringing with them equipment designed to measure and analyze acoustic phenomena. What they found when they reached the hikers' campsite was extraordinary. The area was indeed experiencing unusual acoustic reflections, but these were not simple echoes bouncing off mountain surfaces. The acoustic specialists documented that sounds were being returned with what they described as enhanced harmonics and frequency additions that shouldn't have been possible in a natural environment. Even more unusual, they discovered that the phenomenon was not uniform. Some sounds were reflected more clearly than others, with human voices seeming to produce the most complex echoes, while natural sounds like wind or water produced simpler reflections. The investigation expanded further when the FBI was brought in, not because of any criminal activity, but because of the Bureau's expertise in investigating unusual phenomena that might have national security implications. Special Agent James Wilson from the Albany Field Office arrived with a team of technical specialists, bringing equipment designed to detect and analyze a wide range of acoustic frequencies, including those beyond the range of normal human hearing. What they discovered when they set up their monitoring equipment was even more puzzling. The area was experiencing what could only be described as acoustic holography, with sounds being reflected in 3-dimensional patterns that created the illusion of movement and directionality. The technical specialists noted that some of the echoes contained what appeared to be mathematical sequences and geometric patterns, suggesting a form of communication or information transmission that was beyond human technology. The case took an unexpected turn when one of the FBI's acoustic specialists, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, noticed that the phenomenon seemed to be most intense near a specific rock formation at the edge of the clearing. This formation, a series of quartzite boulders arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern, showed signs of what geologists described as unusual weathering, with surfaces that were smoother and more reflective than should have been possible, given their age and exposure to the elements. When the monitoring equipment was placed near these boulders, the acoustic phenomena intensified dramatically, suggesting that the rock formation was somehow involved in creating or amplifying the echoes. The FBI team also noted that the formation appeared to align with certain astronomical features, with specific stones pointing toward the North Star, the rising sun, and other celestial bodies, suggesting that it might have been constructed deliberately for acoustic or astronomical purposes. The investigation intensified when a team of archaeologists from the State University of New York was brought in to examine the rock formation. What they discovered was extraordinary. The formation appeared to be human-made, dating back at least 2,000 years to a period before known Native American tribes had inhabited the area. The stones were arranged in a complex pattern that incorporated principles of acoustics that shouldn't have been known to ancient peoples, including what appeared to be parabolic reflectors and frequency filters. The archaeologists also found a series of carvings on the stones depicting what looked like sound waves, musical instruments, and even what might have been diagrams of acoustic principles. Most unusual of all, they discovered that the entire formation was built on a foundation of quartz, a mineral known for its piezoelectric properties, the ability to convert mechanical stress into electrical signals, and vice versa. The federal investigation continued for 2 weeks, during which time the scientific teams documented the full range of acoustic phenomena occurring in the area. What they found was that the rock formation was acting as a natural acoustic processor, taking in sounds from the environment and modifying them in complex ways before reflecting them back. The quartz foundation appeared to be converting the mechanical energy of sound waves into electrical signals, which were then processed by the arrangement of the stones before being converted back into sound waves. The result was a sophisticated acoustic system that could modify, enhance, and even add to sounds in ways that seemed almost intelligent. The FBI team noted that the system seemed to respond differently to different types of sounds, with human voices producing the most complex modifications and natural sounds producing simpler ones. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of the investigation was what happened when the team attempted to communicate with whatever was creating the acoustic phenomena. By using a frequency generator to produce specific tones and sequences near the rock formation, they were able to elicit responses that appeared to be direct answers to their queries. These responses, when analyzed, revealed what seemed to be information about the local environment, including the locations of water sources, the presence of wildlife, and even predictions of weather changes. The communication was limited and difficult to establish, but when it worked, it provided what appeared to be accurate information that couldn't have been known through conventional means. The team also discovered that the system seemed to respond more positively to certain types of sounds, particularly musical tones and harmonic frequencies, suggesting that it might have been designed for communication rather than simply for acoustic reflection. The Adirondack incident became the subject of intense scientific interest within the federal government, with multiple agencies competing for access to the site and the data being collected. The U.S. Forest Service, asserting its jurisdiction over the wilderness area, established a formal research protocol that required all agencies to work in cooperation with environmental specialists and to minimize their impact on the sensitive ecosystem. The archaeologists noted that the site had likely been used for ceremonial or communication purposes by ancient peoples who possessed knowledge of acoustics that was previously unknown to modern science. The acoustic specialists documented the full range of phenomena, creating detailed recordings and analyses that would be studied for years to come. The federal case file on the Adirondack Echoes, 21-357 ADK, remains partially classified, with only redacted versions available to researchers. What is known is that the phenomenon gradually diminished over a period of several weeks, eventually ceasing altogether by late May of 2021. The scientific teams documented the entire process, noting that the acoustic reflections became progressively simpler before finally disappearing, as if whatever system had been creating them was gradually losing power or functionality. The official explanation given to the public was that a rare combination of geological and atmospheric conditions had created unusual acoustic reflections in the area. This explanation satisfied most people, though those who had experienced the phenomenon, including the hikers, Deputy Mitchell, and Ranger Chen, knew it was inadequate. In a conversation with an FBI agent, Chen reportedly said, "I've spent my life in these mountains, and I thought I knew every rock and tree. What we experienced wasn't just sound bouncing off cliffs, it was something deliberate, something intelligent, as if the mountains themselves were trying to tell us something." Today, the site near Mount Marshall is considered environmentally sensitive, with access restricted to those who have obtained permits from the U.S. Forest Service. The scientific teams who studied the phenomenon published limited versions of their findings, though the most extraordinary aspects of their research remain classified. Deputy Sarah Mitchell was promoted to sergeant and transferred to a different part of the county, though she occasionally returns to the Adirondacks for hiking trips. In a private conversation with a former colleague, she reportedly said, "I don't know what we heard those weeks in the mountains, but I know it changed how I think about the natural world. The forest is not just a collection of trees and rocks, it's a complex system with its own memory and its own voice. And for a brief period, we were allowed to listen to it speaking. The scientists can call it acoustic phenomena if they want, but I know what I heard, and I know it was alive." The case remains officially unresolved, a testament to the limitations of scientific inquiry when confronted with phenomena that exist beyond the boundaries of current understanding and the possibility that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that has been lost to modern science. The Mojave Desert stretches across California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah, a landscape defined by extremes. Vast salt flats, jagged mountain ranges, and endless sand create one of the most isolated and unforgiving environments in North America. Temperatures can climb past 120 degrees in summer, and the distances between towns are measured not in miles, but in hours. It is a place where disorientation is common, mirages are expected, and survival depends on preparation. Yet in the summer of 2021, something occurred in the Mojave that defied even the desert's long history of strange optical tricks. On July 22, 2021, at approximately 2:15 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department received a series of emergency calls from an area southeast of Baker, California. The callers were a group of off-road enthusiasts who claimed they were observing impossible structures rising from the desert floor. At first, dispatchers assumed the situation involved dehydration or heat-related disorientation. Reports of mirages were routine in the Mojave, but the callers were calm, coherent, and insistent. They were also providing photographic evidence. The initial call came from Michael Torres, a 29-year-old photographer leading a small expedition of 3 off-road vehicles. The group had traveled roughly 15 miles southeast of Baker on a remote dirt road, well away from tourist routes or known developments. Torres explained that they first noticed what appeared to be a mirage on the horizon, tall geometric forms shimmering in the heat. As they drove closer, however, the shapes did not blur or dissolve. Instead, they became sharper. Towers, angular walls, and structures resembling buildings reflected the sunlight in a way that seemed deliberate rather than distorted. Using a telephoto lens, Torres photographed the scene. The images showed clear architectural forms that did not match any known installations, mining operations, or military facilities in the region. According to Torres, the clarity of the photographs convinced him that what he was seeing could not be explained by ordinary atmospheric refraction. Sheriff's Deputy Robert Kim was dispatched to investigate. Reaching the group required nearly 40 minutes of highway driving, followed by over an hour navigating rough desert terrain. Before leaving pavement, Kim contacted the Bureau of Land Management, which oversaw the public lands in the area. Ranger Jennifer Wu, a veteran of 8 years in the Mojave, agreed to accompany him. When Kim and Wu arrived around 4:30 p.m., they saw the phenomenon immediately. Roughly 3 miles away, across an otherwise empty desert floor, stood what appeared to be a complex of structures. They reflected light like crystal or polished glass and displayed sharp edges and repeating geometric patterns. Wu noted something that troubled her deeply. The structures cast shadows. Shadows implied solid, 3-dimensional forms, not illusions. Kim observed the scene through binoculars and confirmed the same details. He checked GPS coordinates and topographic maps. There was nothing recorded at that location. No roads, no buildings, no restricted sites. It was supposed to be empty desert. The situation became stranger when the group attempted to approach the structures. As the vehicles moved forward, the apparent distance to the structures remained unchanged. No matter how far they drove, the forms stayed fixed on the horizon. When the vehicles stopped, the structures stopped moving as well, maintaining their relative position. Torres continued photographing the phenomenon, switching lenses and filters. Later, when reviewing the images, he noticed subtle inconsistencies. Details appeared to shift between shots, as though the structures were not entirely static but somehow responsive to observation. The following morning, the Bureau of Land Management escalated the incident. Given the location and the photographic evidence, the BLM dispatched a team from its National Science and Technology Center. They arrived with equipment designed to analyze atmospheric optics, light refraction, and thermal effects. What they found challenged standard explanations. The structures were visible across multiple wavelengths, not just in visible light. Even more unusual, the phenomenon persisted as temperatures dropped in the evening when traditional mirages should have vanished. Within 24 hours, the Department of Defense was notified. The Mojave's proximity to military installations raised immediate concerns. Specialists from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency arrived with instruments capable of monitoring electromagnetic activity across a broad spectrum. Their findings deepened the mystery. The structures emitted distinct electromagnetic signatures that did not match any known natural or technological source. The signals appeared patterned, almost informational, and changed subtly depending on how and where they were measured. Dr. Marcus Chen, one of the DARPA specialists, identified a potential focal point for the phenomenon, a nearby geological formation. Rising from the desert like frozen fountains, the formation consisted of crystalline outcroppings, unlike anything typically found in the region. Preliminary analysis revealed mineral compositions inconsistent with local geology. When monitoring equipment was placed near these crystals, the visual phenomena intensified dramatically. The formation also displayed unusual alignments. Certain crystalline spires pointed toward celestial reference points such as the North Star and the sunrise at specific times of year. While geologists believed the formation was natural, its arrangement appeared to enhance its interaction with light and electromagnetic energy. Physicists from the University of California were brought in to conduct a deeper analysis. Their findings were extraordinary. The crystals possessed properties that allowed them to bend and manipulate light in stable configurations, producing what the team described as persistent, three-dimensional projections. These projections behaved like solid objects while remaining intangible. Microscopic examination revealed internal structures resembling antennae or circuitry, though no artificial materials were found. Beneath the formation lay concentrated deposits of rare earth elements known for their electromagnetic capabilities. Over the next 3 weeks, federal teams documented the phenomenon extensively. The prevailing theory was that the formation functioned as a natural projection system. Environmental electromagnetic energy, solar radiation, atmospheric electricity, and possibly cosmic sources, was collected, processed, and converted into coherent visual displays. These displays took the form of complex structures that seemed architectural but served no known purpose. Perhaps most unsettling was the system's apparent responsiveness. When researchers transmitted specific electromagnetic frequencies, the projections changed. Shapes became more intricate, colors shifted, and new forms appeared. Some resembled unfamiliar architectural styles, others looked like diagrams or maps, though none corresponded to known human designs. As interest grew, access to the site became tightly controlled. The BLM asserted jurisdiction and enforced strict environmental protections. Multiple agencies competed for data, but cooperation was mandated. Despite the intensity of the research, little information was released publicly. By mid-August 2021, the phenomenon began to fade. The structures grew simpler, less defined, and eventually vanished altogether, as if the system had exhausted its energy source. The official explanation given to the public cited a rare combination of geological and atmospheric conditions. For those who witnessed it firsthand, the explanation rang hollow. Ranger Wu later remarked privately that the experience changed her understanding of the desert. She had seen countless mirages over her career, but nothing like this. Deputy Kim echoed the sentiment, stating that the event permanently altered how he thought about reality itself. Today, the site near Baker is classified as environmentally sensitive. Access is restricted, and the case file, 21-642 MDV, remains heavily redacted. Officially unresolved, the Mojave mirages stand as a reminder that even in places we believe we understand, there may exist systems and phenomena operating just beyond the limits of human perception, waiting briefly and perhaps deliberately to be seen. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, stretching from mist-shrouded Appalachian mountains to sun-scorched southwestern deserts. Across these diverse terrains, sheriff's departments serve as the first line of defense against the unknown, responding to calls that sometimes evolve into something far more complex. The 8 cases we've examined, from the vanishing at Black Ridge to the echoes in the Adirondacks, represent moments when the ordinary world brushed against something beyond current understanding. Each began as a routine call to local law enforcement, yet ended with questions that remain unanswered despite extensive federal investigations. What connects these disparate incidents is how they challenge our fundamental assumptions about reality. In Black Ridge, Tennessee, an experienced hiker vanished without a trace, leaving behind only coded symbols. In Baker's Creek, Oregon, floating lights and shadow figures defied explanation. At Mesa Verde, ancient ruins became sites of light phenomena, suggesting knowledge beyond human capability. In Harper Valley, Kentucky, 5 people disappeared under circumstances contradicting all logic. The waters of Blackwater Sound hosted a dome of water that moved with apparent intelligence. The ground at Pine Ridge sang with mathematical frequencies. The Adirondack Mountains echoed with sounds that defied acoustical principles. And the Mojave Desert projected structures that appeared solid, yet remained forever out of reach. These cases share characteristics suggesting manifestations of similar phenomena. Unusual light displays moving with intelligence, sounds containing mathematical patterns, physical evidence defying analysis, and locations geologically unique where the veil between realities seems thin. Federal investigations revealed the limitations of our current scientific methods when confronted with such phenomena. Despite bringing advanced technology and expertise to each case, agencies ultimately raised more questions than answers, leaving mysteries unsolved. Perhaps most intriguing is the possibility that these phenomena represent communication with something beyond human understanding. The mathematical patterns at Pine Ridge, responses to electromagnetic signals in the Mojave, and complex echoes in the Adirondacks all suggest intelligence rather than random natural processes. These communications often occur in remote, natural settings, as if whatever makes contact prefers the quiet clarity of the natural world. The American landscape holds many secrets, and the night is filled with stories that refuse to die. These 8 cases represent just a fraction of unusual incidents reported across the country. They remind us that the boundary between known and unknown is not fixed, but constantly shifting as our understanding expands. They also remind us of the courage of law enforcement officers who document these phenomena despite skepticism, standing at the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary. If you or